Hello friends, it's time for another edition of our study through the letter of James, and today I want to give a very brief review of James chapter 2 verses 20 through 26. Now we know what his point is in this section, don't we? It's just a continuation of this point, that faith and works are inseparable. You can't talk about faith without talking about the works that demonstrate it. All right. Now, he's going to use two examples, two exhibits in this particular paragraph to make his point, and those are two carefully chosen characters, Abraham, the father of the Jewish religion, and Rahab, a pagan prostitute. And I suppose his point in choosing these two people is certainly that this is a universal truth, that faith must be considered in connection, united with works. That's true for the father of the Jewish religion, Abraham, as well as a pagan prostitute, Rahab. It's true of all of us. We can't say that we have faith unless our deeds and our works demonstrate that faith. Okay, what does he say about Abraham? Well, he says, Abraham was justified, that is, he was given a right standing before God, when he offered his son Isaac upon the altar. Now, that word when is important, I think. He's not saying that Abraham was justified because he offered his son Isaac on the altar. He's saved when he offered his son Isaac on the altar. It was by faith that he was justified, but the only faith that justifies is the faith that is united with works. One cannot say that Abraham had faith until he demonstrated it by his obedience to God. Now, you'll recall that Paul also said something on this subject, and I think we ought to take a quick look at that. It's a bit of a tangent, but I think it might help us to think theologically, if you please. In Romans chapter 3 and verse 28, what does the Apostle Paul write? For we hold that a person is justified by faith apart from works prescribed by the law. Is that contrary to what James is saying? James says that we're justified by faith that is demonstrated in works. Paul says we're justified by faith apart from works of the law. Now, maybe these two authors are talking about two different kinds of works. What do you think? Paul is talking about works of law. James is talking about works of deeds, good works, good deeds, works that demonstrate faith. But let's continue. Let's read what Paul says in Romans chapter 4, verses 1 through 3. What then are we to say was gained by Abraham our father according to the flesh? For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does the Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. Now that's interesting because both Paul and James use this same text from Genesis chapter 15, that Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him as righteousness. But in Paul's case, he says that Abraham was justified by works, whereas James says that Abraham was justified by faith. What is the harmony, if there is any, between these two authors? I think the best way to understand this is to say that Paul and James, at the very least, are addressing two dissimilar situations, two different situations. Paul's audience is in danger of relying on their works, of relying on their works of the law for salvation. It's as if they are saying, we are saved because we do good works. We are saved because we obey the law. We are made right in God's sight because, look at us, we are able to keep God's law. That's their perspective. James's readers are excusing themselves from good works. They're saying, in essence, we don't need to practice good works because we believe. We are monotheists. We believe that God is one. Our doctrine is correct. It is right. So we don't need to do good works. You see the difference? Paul's audience, we're proud of our good works. We're saved because we do them. James's audience, we don't need to practice good works because we have faith. James says you can't talk about faith without talking about doing good works. Paul says, don't you rely on your obedience of the works of the law as if you can save yourself, because after all, we're saved by grace. Paul would certainly agree that we must do good works. He would certainly agree that faith includes the doing of good works. For example, in Romans chapter 2, where is it, Carrie? Romans chapter 2 and verse 6, Paul writes, "For God will repay according to each one's deeds." And it concludes that there will be glory and honor and peace for everyone who does good, for the Jew first and also the Greek, verse 10. So Paul would never minimize the doing of good deeds, doing of good works. He would only say that we're not saved because we do those good works. Those good works only demonstrate that we have faith. We're saved by grace through faith. I hope that you and I can see the difference here. I don't think Paul and James are disagreeing with each other. I also think that this might be a possibility, that when Paul thinks about faith, he sees it as a package word. Everything that we would do as a demonstration of faith, he would include in that word faith. Whereas James seems to want to separate those two words, faith and works. Actually, belief and works. He would certainly say that faith is composed of both belief and works, but for his argument, he is separating the two, and he's saying you can't talk about faith without talking about both belief and good works. Well, I hope that helps. I'm not sure that it does. Maybe I just made the waters a little muddier. At any rate, we get James's point, don't we? That you can't talk about faith without talking about works. Okay. And then the example of Rahab. Oh, I like that example. We've got the highly respected Abraham, and then we've got this pagan prostitute proving the necessity of doing good works. It's a universal application. So what's his point? His point is that the only faith worth the name is the faith that is expressed in deeds. And if I were to quickly apply this very point, once again, I would say we need to be careful today. We need to be careful that our religion does not devolve into mere head belief. That we think we're right with God because we believe the right doctrine, because we believe the truth, because we believe the right things. It is obedience and good deeds that give evidence of a sincere faith. And so again, what are we doing? What are the deeds of kindness and mercy and obedience that we are practicing which demonstrate our faith? That's very important. Okay, I need to hang up this phone. Preview, James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. We're changing topics. Here comes the warning against teachers and tongues. Yikes, this is going to get personal. I'll see you in a few days.